Welcome back to Ultimate Potential, a mental health podcast. I'm here. Craig's here, sitting here.
Yep. We're excited about today.
Yes, we are. We're both well fed from a good Thanksgiving dinner and looking forward to the holidays. Speaking of the holidays, we always want this to be a special, slow-paced time of healing and family connectedness. But for so many people, the holidays are super, super stressful.
Yeah, it's sometimes the saddest or the most difficult time of year.
Right. We Choose Mental Health, which is a nonprofit that Craig and I helped found. It was interviewed about ways to help your children with their mental health during the holidays. That article just came out in Active Family Magazine. So go ahead and check the podcast notes. We'll put a link in there to that article. It's on page 14 and 15. And you'll get some good tips on specifically what you can do during the holidays, during the time off school to help support your kids.
Yeah. Follow the research and the statistics. It is a kind of a dangerous time for people that have mental health instability.
Yep. And family pressures are all amplified, right?
Yep.
Because it's kind of like during COVID, right? You're in the house together a lot and you don't have the routine that you usually do. Well, we are excited to have a special guest with us here today. On the phone, we have Annie. Annie is AJ's mother, and she has walked a path with her son of behavioral health and mental health and seeking treatment at different levels. Really, what we wanted to do with this podcast is speak a little more directly to the parents out there who are in the mix, who are struggling right now. And sometimes it can feel hopeless, right? You can feel like you're just lost. And Annie is someone who has walked that path and to a degree is still walking that path and knows where some of the potholes are, knows what some of the best practices are, and has some really good practical, I think, advice to help some of our listeners. Yeah. So Annie, welcome.
Thank you so much, Tony and Craig. It's an honor and a pleasure to be with you today.
We really appreciate your time today. And of course, we honor you because we already know, Tony and I know your history. And in the spirit of sensitivity and confidentiality and anything else, Annie, would you briefly tell us your story as much as you feel comfortable with? Tell us about how you were brought into this world of mental health treatment.
Yes. When I was invited to come on, I had so many thoughts and so many memories came, flooding back. Some of those were really hard memories. And basically our son spiraled into a vicious cycle of self-doubt and anxiety and depression due to a history of bullying. But it wasn't until his freshman year in high school where just everything broke for him. He was being physically assaulted at school by upperclassmen. He was being racially targeted. It led to cyberbullying. And we recognized that he just fell into a hole. He no longer wanted to go outside. He was highly paranoid. He was just so sad. And, school refusal. He wouldn't even go to his favorite restaurant, always looking behind, his shoulders. And then we couldn't manage what was happening on social media. It was just too big for us. And we noticed that we couldn't help him. He was seeking therapy once a week, but that did nothing for him. And we just knew that we had to take him out of his home. We knew that we had to take him out of California where we live because we couldn't control the social media. And at that time, my husband and I were struggling in our marriage. So our home no longer was safe for our son. So he didn't even have a safe space emotionally. Yes, physically, everything was there, everything was intact, but emotionally, he felt the turmoil and the division between my husband and I. So that added to the struggles that he had. And we made the hard decision, and we hired an educational consultant, and we had him transported to Evoke Wilderness Therapy in southern Utah. And from there, after 93 days, he then came to Telos and was there for 10 months. There were some self-medicating with pot to help calm the anxiety, but that only made him more paranoid and more anxious. We recognized that, like after he was in therapy, things were coming out more. And for us, this entire journey has been a gift, but it was wrapped in the ugliest of wrapping paper.
Yeah.
Well said.
So, yeah,
Okay.
that's kind of our story.
So I kind of apologize for having you have to relive that, right? I mean, even in preparation for this podcast, there are a lot of emotional memories, and I'm sure things that came up. Were you well educated before? Let's going back to maybe AJ's 6th or 7th grade year. Did you have any idea what educational consultants were, or wilderness programs, or therapeutic boarding schools, or residential treatment centers, or was this all new to you?
It was all new. And my husband and I, we, prided ourselves in being very hands-on with our children and thinking that we knew everything that we needed to know. We worked with young people in our careers. We've been parent educators. We've done so many things. So we took everything for granted. We thought we knew everything that we needed to know until we witnessed our son not leaving the home, isolating, being so angry with us. Um, it was nothing. It was, we just knew we didn't have the skills. We knew that we had to get him out. We knew that it wouldn't help him to remain where he was again. And that relates specifically to the cyberbullying that he was experiencing. We didn't know what a educational consultant was. We had no idea about wilderness therapy except for some of the horror stories that you hear in passing. We knew nothing about organizations and schools like Telos. It was a whole new world. It was just a huge learning curve for us. We were, there were many days where I felt like I didn't have enough oxygen to breathe. But I also knew that my husband and I knew that we had to take that step forward in order to provide some kind of relief for him, because we recognize just the deep, deep sadness and vicious cycle that he was in.
That very vivid, your comment. The many moments where I felt like that I didn't have enough oxygen to breathe. An emotional statement, right? That sits deep in our hearts. Were you ever talk about fear? Were you ever afraid? And what were you afraid of through this process?
Fear was my constant companion. Fear lived in every pore of my being. I was afraid of losing him. I was afraid that he might get mixed up with kids that would, influence some from further negative behavior. I was afraid that he could hurt someone if he was out in public and went into a rage because he was so angry with the abuse that he was suffering from. I was afraid that he could die. I was afraid that he could go to jail. I was afraid of losing my firstborn son.
So the stakes are really high.
The stakes were high, and it was fast. You know, we knew, looking in his eyes, that there was a sense of emptiness. And did I think he was suicidal? 10%. You know, 90% I knew he wasn't suicidal, but 10% I knew. And 10% was enough for me.
Yeah. So I have a question. You know, I've talked to many families, many mothers, fathers, parents who they've walked this path, and what they've described is failure after failure of lesser efforts. So they tried outpatient therapy and, you know, it just wasn't enough. Or then they
Mm-hmm.
moved to medication management, and that maybe helped temporarily, but ended up not helping. And some of them have tried,
Mm-hmm.
you know, more intensive outpatient in the community. But it sounds like at some point for some families, it gets to the point where for life safety issues and just for the practical solutions that you're looking for, that child needs to be taken out of an environment that just doesn't have the resources, placed somewhere else for a period of time, the resources built up, and then return home. Now, some families would look at that as a defeat or a failure.
Mm-hmm.
Other
Mm-hmm.
families I know would look at that as a supreme act of love. Can you talk a
Mm-hmm.
little bit about what was going through your heart and mind when you actually made the decision to do an out of home placement?
So we didn't explore, you know, the IOPs, the PHP, all of that, because we, again, it was the social media piece. We needed to get him removed. And even if he went further in outpatient, he was still here.
Mm-hmm.
He was still, you know, in our community. He was still at home. And AJ is very, very popular um, young man. And so a lot of people were shocked when later on they heard about his journey. They're like, oh, well, he's so popular. He has so many friends. And but but because of the popularity, there were a lot of pressures,
Yeah.
and it was always pressure to perform and um, to be, you know, seen a certain way. And some of that pressure came from my husband and I, our expectations and how we were living our lives. Um, so we knew that we had to remove him from the environment because ourselves as parents, we were part of his trigger, and we recognized that humbly. You know, I mean, I was brought to my knees in making the decision to transport AJ to Wilderness, and then us, you know, physically bringing him to Telos. Um, it's nothing that any parent can imagine that they would have to do. But at the same time, in my midst of desperation, I also knew that I needed to do what was necessary to save my son. I recognized the urgency. And were there doubts? Every single moment of every single day, there were doubts. But I also knew I lacked the the resources in the sense of helping him, that it was beyond what I could offer him in the home as well as what was available to us. And AJ was always, you know, I prided myself in being a mom who thought she knew the heartbeat of her children.
Yeah.
And there were so many red flags that I missed. And a lot of that also came back to me, you know, within my own perspective of who I was as a woman, a wife, you know, a mother. And because of the state of my marriage, it added a lot of heartache for AJ.
Yeah.
And being away from that temporarily was also safe for him. So, you know, we moved quickly, I would say, and we didn't have a lot of time to basically interview different education consultant. We were referred to one. I spoke to her. I felt confident in who she was as a person, and then we just started interviewing. and we moved him, very, very quickly.
How
It
how
all took place within like a span of 6 weeks, six
how
to 8 weeks.
how did you how did you get referred to a consultant? Like, how did you find that? What was your what
The
did
one, the one highlight of all this was when this was going down, I had started seeing a therapist for myself.
Okay.
And it was through my personal therapist who recommended this particular education consultant because one of her personal friend had used this woman.
Okay.
So
So
that's how I came across this person, and I was introduced to this whole different world of treatment and of support and of healing.
I know that many of these therapeutic educational consultants are members of an association called IECA, which is Independent Educational Consultant Association, and at
Hmm.
IECA.com or .org. I'll have to check which. IECA.org, I believe. Um, they are, we can actually put that link in the notes of the podcast as well. So just go check those, and you'll be able to find a website that will show you these referring professionals that are in your area that can help get you connected to services if you feel like you need this level of care. Annie, I'm a little bit curious. You went through this process, the process of going through a wilderness experience, the process of going through a longer term residential treatment experience. I'm wondering what advice you have for parents. Number one, parents who are just struggling with their children's mental health in general, but then specifically parents that are walking this same journey that you've walked. Do you have any advice?
My advice is you have to trust your gut instinct. If you are starting to question different forms of treatment, if you're asking the question, then it's time to start exploring deeply into different avenues. There are so many things that we don't know about as parents. And this entire world of ECs and wilderness and RTCs and therapeutic boarding schools, etc., it's not talked about often. Maybe now after COVID, but when we started, it's not, normalized. It's actually, there's a lot of shame involved. There's a lot of people make you feel like you're a failure, etc. But if you're starting to question, and if you're noticing signs that your child is exhibiting and is acting out of the norm, I would ask you to be curious, to pay attention, to observe, to ask questions, but not in a prodding way, more of out of curiosity, so that you can learn more, so that you have more data, and um, and then to begin reaching out to different support providers. That could be the counselors at school, that could be your pediatrician, that could be someone from church. There are so many people who are willing to help. And oftentimes we need to work through our shame and guilt as parents, and be that courageous warrior to ask for the help, to say, hey, I really need your help. I'm struggling here. And I could share this, that when I asked for help, when AJ was in crisis, no one turned me down. They all asked me, what can I do? How can I help you? What more do you need? All of his, doctors were willing to do whatever was needed to support him, his counselors at school, his teachers, everyone. We didn't share a lot with a lot of people, but the people who we did share with, they were more than willing to support us. They didn't need to understand everything. They just needed to know that they were there for us.
that's
And for the families who are walking this journey, I just want to remind you that you are in treatment with your child. This is not just for your son or daughter. This is also for you. And if you lean into the journey, if you lean into the work and the process, no matter how hard it is, you will be able to come through the other side, and you will be able to model for your child what it takes to work through difficult emotions and heartache, and what resiliency looks like, and what living with a heart of peace looks like. And, I'm referring to a book called Anatomy of Peace that Telos had us read and work through. And, how do you build a relationship, a new way of being? And it's all possible, even in the midst of crisis and desperation and heartache. You don't have to walk it alone, but you do need to walk through it.
Thank you, Annie. And AJ's been home now for a while, and I know,
Hmm.
as much as we want everything to be fixed, or for treatment, a long-term residential treatment, or any kind of out-of-home placement, we want that child to come back completely capable, completely stable, completely, you know, the glowing
Right.
golden child. But that's not necessarily reality. Can you talk a little bit about how your son has done since he's been home?
Yes. So this coming December, mid-December, will mark 2 years since AJ completed the program at Telos and transitioned home. And I would have to say that the transition home is one of the most difficult, aside from, pre-wilderness. And that is because he is coming home to a space and to an environment that at one time caused him profound sadness and unhappiness.
Mm-hmm.
So it hasn't been a perfect road. But Larry Smith, who worked with us during the aftercare process, reminded my husband and I that the home is just the next therapeutic setting. And that
Mm-hmm.
really helped me. That really helped me shift my thinking. And it took me back to how it was for him at the beginning of Evoke. How was it for him at the beginning of Telos, and the progression and the growth and the stumbles and all of the things that occurred during those two placements. And because of that shift in mindset, I was able to give myself more grace, and I was able to give him more grace, and recognize that it's not a linear
Mm-hmm.
journey. Recovering and healing is not a straight path, that we are expected, honestly, to fumble. But now we are more equipped we have more paddings, right?
Yeah.
To know how to respond, and how to hone in on the skills that we have learned. The skills will not magically appear.
Mm-hmm.
They will not magically be perfect. I made a lot of mistakes. I time traveled, meaning I went back to some old behaviors in how I parented and responded and reacted to AJ. And he himself also did the same thing. But what changed? What changed was the time that it took us to get back to equilibrium.
Yeah.
And as each day moves forward, we were able to come back to a place of peace in a shorter amount of time.
Yeah.
So the
I
road home is hard. The road home should be hard.
yeah.
It should be expected to be hard, because there are so many other factors out there that influence and impact and kind of test you. But at the same time, there are we've all gained skills. We have to put them into practice, and with everything, practice leads to a greater sense of confidence, a greater sense of validation, and it takes time. No one can expect a child to come back fixed. I've seen the way I've struggled, so I can only imagine my son, whose brain is not even fully formed, being under 25. I can't expect him to be fully fixed.
Yeah.
So it's a journey, and as parents, we just do our best. And one thing that I get into is I have to remind myself, every day I want to do one thing towards making a positive change for myself. And if I take care of myself as a parent, my children, my house, my family is in a better place.
That's beautiful. So
Yeah.
things don't have to be perfect to be better, right?
Correct.
I had
Correct.
one, I often tell a story of that hitting the parenting bullseye, for many children. We all see these children in our neighborhoods that they seem to have raised themselves and off they are, go to Harvard or Yale and on scholarship. And
Right.
with a lot of kids, to hit the parenting bullseye, it's like you're shooting at a target and the target is as big as the side of a barn. So any parent can kind of almost, with their eyes closed, flick an arrow at it and it hits the bullseye, right? Great kid goes off and
Right.
succeeds. But some of our children, because of who they are, the hand they were dealt genetically, because of trauma, because of other reasons, that bullseye is not the size of the side of a barn. It's the size of a quarter, and it's 100
Yeah.
yards out. So if we
Right.
as parents are going to hit the bullseye, it's not about bad parenting or good parenting. It's about being more expert so that you can hit that
Correct.
bullseye from that distance. And that's what I see you having gone through. You went through a process where you became like a special forces trained parent, like the SEAL Team 6 of parenting. So you can now meet these needs that were hard to meet before. So it's not that everything's
Right.
perfect, right? That will never be the case,
Right.
but you're more capable, you're more confident, and AJ now has skills that he didn't have before, and he might not have been able to gain in any other way.
Right. And I also have to share that it has impacted our other two children. They are different people because of the way we are living, of the way our being is. Our two AJ's two younger sisters, they are growing up in a different environment. So it also benefits the girls.
The whole
So it
family
impacts
system,
everyone.
the whole family system
Correct.
has
The whole
changed.
family, yeah, yeah, we shifted. And like you were saying, that bullseye is so far. Sometimes you don't even see it, but but it's there,
Yeah.
right? It's there, and there's that faith that you just know because your kid is still alive, and your kid has lived out in wilderness, and your kid has dealt with so many hard things while being at RTC or TBS, and they're still standing. And I think we have to celebrate the moments of achievement, no
Yeah.
matter how small they are. And we have to remember to cherish those and to protect them and to live in that space of joy, even if that joy lasts for 30 minutes.
Yep. Even if it's short
We,
lived.
you know, we
Yep.
have to, yeah, because those are the moments that will carry us forth when it's hard. And, we have to remind our kid that, hey, look at what you've done. Look at how much you've accomplished. Let's not compare it to someone else because we really don't know their story.
Yeah.
Well, Annie, want to give a very genuine thank you for your willingness to be vulnerable and share your story to potentially, right, the whole country or the whole world. This is a public podcast. And I mean, there's so many more questions that we want to ask you, and we're out of time at this time. But first, I just want you to hear the gratitude. I hope and pray that this podcast will reach families that need help. Not every family needs everything that you have chosen to go through with you and AJ and your daughters, your husband, but many do. And almost
Right.
all of them have no idea what they need or where or how to find it. And so hopefully your courage and sensitivity joining us today will will bless other families. And so I want you to hear that big thank you. And then
Thank you.
as we close off today, in your honor, Annie, and in the honor of so many parents, I'm going to tell you a little bit, just kind of to close out our podcast today, a little bit of a soapbox maybe, or maybe a passion. I like people, and people tend to get along well with me. And so many people that I really respect, admire, and they're socially connected with me, they'll say on the side, they'll kind of hint like, aren't some of the families, or most of the families that come to you, isn't it kind of just like parenting issues? And what happens to me viscerally, like on an emotional scale, is I get really defensive, and I get a little upset, and I have to actually catch myself that I don't lash out, like a wild
Mhm.
animal, because it is so natural. Like all of the families, almost without exception, that come through our program and sit in the parent support groups, they talk about that shame. They talk about that inability. And so what we see is a whole bunch of super capable families with functional children, in other siblings, and they are on their A game, and they're out serving the community, and they are doing everything they can, and they're looking at all the resources, and they're reading the books, and they're going to therapy, and then and then you get on the internet and you read these, just insensitive or uneducated or just misguided people who are judgmental, and they just kind of throw it back on the
Mhm.
parents. And I just
Mhm.
think that, thank heaven for you and for thousands of other families who have been able to rise above that shame, that social guilt, and realize that sometimes you just can't fix everything any more than you could fix leukemia. If AJ had
Mhm.
leukemia, you're not an
Mhm.
oncologist, and you don't have the
Absolutely.
treatment for that. And
Absolutely.
it doesn't
Mhm.
have to mean that you're a bad parent or an incapable parent, or that you've somehow caused everything. But you still have to be part of the journey, right? And I think you were very
Yeah.
clear on that. So I to add on to what you have said, very inspiring words today. I just want to, Tony and I want to share with the world that we do not see families that need help as the culprit or the blame, or as incompetent families. We see you as courageous and brave and wise and and capable, but in a really, really tough situation, trying to save the life of your child. And so, with
Right.
that, I'll step back off my soapbox. I usually don't get in there very
Thank
often,
you for that.
but
Thank you so much.
so
Annie, before we wrap up, if you could magically change anything about the state of mental health treatment in our nation, if you had your
Mhm.
magic wand, what would you do? What would you change?
Insurance coverage,
Okay. All this costs money.
accessibility.
Yeah.
All this costs money, and we have to jump through so many hoops to get what our kids need. Craig brought up, leukemia, cancer, etc. Well, mental health is part of the body,
Yeah.
and it impacts so many other parts of the body. And we are shamed and we are guilted, to, as people who are not enough of a parent, but that has nothing to do with it.
yeah,
Really, we are just trying to seek the help that's needed for a child who's not well.
yep,
And we want to be seen, we want to be heard, we want to have accessibility without so many red tape.
Yeah. And for every child like AJ that receives this level or this quality of help, there's 100 or more that need it and can't afford it or don't know how to find it or don't know it exists.
Right,
Well,
right.
Annie,
And yeah,
thank
if
you.
I could, that's my wand.
there's your
That's your
wand.
magic wand. We'll get to work
Yeah.
on that. We'll see if we can make that happen.
Thank you.
Again,
Thank
another
you.
heartfelt thanks to you. You, AJ, your family, you're the reason why we do this work. Um, and it is so, I mean, it's made my week. And I'm just sitting here glowing, going to be walking 6 inches off the ground today, having heard your story and felt of the passion that you have. Um, for our listeners, if you know somebody or you yourself need treatment at this level of care, if you're walking a similar path as Annie and AJ, I mentioned a couple of websites that you can reach out to find a therapeutic or educational consultant who can assess your need and then hand walk you through the process of finding a really good match for who your child is, what they're dealing with diagnostically. Those websites, one is therapeuticconsulting.org. So that is therapeuticconsulting.org. The other one is iecaonline.com. iecaonline.com. And both those links will be in the notes.
Also, Annie referenced a book that comes from the Arbinger Institute, and that is arbinger.com. And they sell multiple books there that are very relevant in this area of specialty.
And we highly recommend the one Annie mentioned, The Anatomy of Peace. We hope that everybody has a wonderful wintry holiday season, that you're surrounded by love and warmth and family. Keep the faith, keep moving forward, and until next time, remember, mental health matters.
Yes.
Thank you.
Good night.